Hi everyone, welcome back to this week's episode of Hand the Mic Over. As always, you can find us on our YouTube at Hand the Mic Over or Spotify and our Instagram handle Hand the Mic Over. I have a very special guest with me today.
She brings a very unique perspective to the table that we will be diving into.
So without further ado, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, my name is Michelle. I'm really excited to be here. Yeah, I'm looking forward to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Michelle. If you don't mind, could you please share what general age group you're from and which countries you're associated with?
So I'm 21, almost 22. My parents are from Afghanistan, but I was born in Tajikistan.
Oh, wow. Where are Afghanistan and Tajikistan located in the world? Just for any listeners who may not be familiar with that area.
They're in Asia, like Central Asia, that region. Yeah, some people think Afghanistan is like part of the Middle East, but it's like more, I guess, towards Central Asian.
Okay, interesting. Are you able to speak your native language?
Yes, I can, yeah.
Which languages do you speak?
So in Afghanistan, you speak Dari. So I speak Dari. And then in Tajikistan, they speak Tajiki, which is basically just like a dialect. So it's pretty much the same language, just like a different accent.
How do I say hi?
Salam.
Salam.
Yeah.
Okay, that's pretty universal.
Mm-hmm.
Which one would you say you speak better, Dari or Tajiki?
I think Dari, just because my parents are both from Afghanistan, so they grew up speaking Dari, and then because I was born in Tajikistan, they speak Tajik there, so I picked up the dialect. But at home, we just speak Dari because, that's our mother tongue.
You mentioned that your parents are from Afghanistan and you were born in Tajikistan.
Yeah.
How old were you when you immigrated from there to Toronto? And did you come directly to Toronto? Or
we were at, I think, Quebec first, and then from Quebec we came to Toronto. I was 6, and then a couple weeks after we came, I turned 7 here. So it's been a while.
Do you have any memories of your life in Afghanistan or Tajikistan before you came to Canada?
So I've never been to Afghanistan in my life, which really sucks because I really want to go. But yeah, I was born and raised in Tajikistan, so I have a lot of really fond memories there. Lots of family members are still there. So just a lot of my memories are just going out with my friends, my family members. It's a really nice country. They have like lots of beautiful scenery and like parks and things like that. I kind of do miss back home a lot.
What's the climate like over there?
Honestly, I don't remember the climate too much, but it's just normal. Like the winters are nothing like here though. The winters are okay. They're bearable, it's just like a little cold. But here it's 10 times more difficult.
For sure. Correct me if I'm wrong, but is that like a mountainous region?
Yeah, it is. I was born in the capital, so it's not as like mountain-y. But then if you go through like the more like rural areas, it's very mountainous. Even Afghanistan, like the area I'm in Afghanistan, there's lots of mountains and rivers and fields, and it's a really beautiful place.
Sounds beautiful. If you have any pictures, please do share so that we can post on our Instagram.
I'll definitely send some pictures.
Okay, so how did you arrive to Quebec and then Toronto? Did you fly both times?
We had a really long flight, maybe 17 hours. We landed in Quebec and then drove to Toronto. I don't really remember too much, but it was really long. And we came like during winter time, so it was really cold. We were kind of unprepared for how cold it was gonna be. Yeah, it was just a very long journey.
So you didn't stay in Quebec? It was just a layover spot?
Yeah.
Do you remember what your first day of moving into Toronto was like?
I don't remember, but my mom, she always tells me, she was like, when we first came to Canada, she would tell me how excited I was. Like, I would just be so happy. She mentions how, like, I lost my tooth during that time, and I would just be smiling and, like, so happy that I'm in Canada and enjoying the weather. So I don't really remember when we first came. Like, it's just, like, bits and pieces.
Oh, so you were a winter fan?
Yeah, because she was like, you love the cold. And I'm like, what? Not anymore.
Yeah, I feel like Canada's winters can do that to people very quickly.
Yeah, I cannot stand winter anymore.
That makes two of us. In the neighborhood that you arrived in Toronto, would you say there was a big Afghan community there, or were you more of a minority?
When we first came, we lived in downtown. There were some Afghans there, but I think we were probably like the minority group. There weren't a lot of Afghans there. There were people from like all different backgrounds, but Afghan Afghans. There was only a couple, the few families that were there, we tried to stick together. If they were here before us, they would help us to navigate living in a new country, in a new city. I don't think there were a lot of Afghans in that area, maybe 10 families.
And then when you moved, did you move into a community where there were more Afghans around you?
Yeah, I think I would say after we moved, there was definitely more Afghans, more South Asians, people from Middle Eastern countries. So it was like a lot more immigrants in this area. It didn't feel too unfamiliar, you know?
Did you go to school in downtown?
Yeah, I did. I went to school for a couple of years downtown, and then afterwards, when we moved, then I continued in the new area.
Was it different from school in the North York area?
No, I don't think it was too different. I really liked it. It was like my first time being in school in Canada, and I loved it so much. That the school was really great, the teachers, the students. I had so much fun that when we moved, I missed it so much. I was like, oh my God, I love that school. I miss it so much, but it was a great experience.
I'm glad to hear that. Did you already know how to speak English when you came here?
No, I didn't know any English, so we had to learn here. But I think when you're younger, you just learn faster. It's easy for you to learn a new language and different things. I was in ESL at first for a little bit, but then I learned the language pretty quickly.
So it sounds like you found an Afghan community to support you guys right off the bat.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming that your transition would have been a lot smoother because of that.
Yeah, it was because in downtown, the few Afghan families that were there, they were there before us. They kind of like helped us navigate through the city, finding different resources, giving tips and things like that. That definitely made it so much easier to like settle in Canada, because I feel like if you don't have anybody there to guide you, you'll just feel so alone if you don't really have a community and anybody there to like support you. So I was really grateful to know people from my community that we can speak the same language, and for them to help us settle in Canada.
Wow, that's amazing. I can't imagine how scary it would be first come to a new country, but having people that are willing to help that much, that's great.
Yeah.
Because you had such a smooth transition and you found a community that could support you right away, do you feel like there was ever a point in your life where you did not feel from Toronto, or did you always feel like you immediately adjusted to Canada life?
That's a good question. I don't know if there was a time where I didn't feel like Canadian, but I did feel like there was a time, like especially when I first started wearing a hijab and just going to like areas where there's not a lot of Muslims or immigrants, and their reaction to me being a hijabi, it just kind of made me sometimes feel a little alone.
Oh, that sounds terrible. You started wearing hijab when you were a child, right? So were these people making these comments towards a child?
I noticed it maybe towards middle school and high school. So I guess, yeah, I was a child, but sometimes you'll be on the bus and like somebody would just sneer at you and like angry towards you, or like they'll like whisper, and sometimes it's other kids, sometimes it's adults.
I'm so sorry you had to go through that.
I mean, I feel like there are other people who kind of like go through worse. So over time, I was like, okay, whatever. I don't really care. You stare at me. It makes me feel a little uncomfortable, but you're just staring and that's it. And I think over time, I just kind of got over it.
Was it hard at the start?
It was. When I was in middle school, I kind of just didn't even want to go outside sometimes, just because I just don't want people to stare at me, you know? Like, it was just really annoying. It started irritating me how people would stare, how people would just like look at me in a certain way. So there were times where I just wouldn't go outside. I'm like, no, I don't really want to deal with like seeing people.
Yeah, I can feel that. If you go back in time now, seeing your child self struggling with that, what is something that you think could have been done differently that would have benefited you as a child and made you feel more welcome?
I think like having someone who steps in for you and defends you, and also like just people adopting different attitudes. Like, Canada has always been a country full of newcomers and people from different races and backgrounds and cultures, and to have so much shock when you see somebody who's like different from you, just like changing your attitude and being more welcoming and more open-minded, I think that can go a long way.
In school, did you feel like it was the same, or was this more in public?
No, I think because there were like so many Muslims in my school and in the area and so many newcomers, I didn't feel out of place. I had hijabi friends and Muslim friends and friends from like all different backgrounds. So at school, I felt like at ease and safe. It was just more like when I kind of like leave this area
Mm-hmm.
Within my community, I felt really supported. I felt great.
That's amazing. I'm so glad to hear that. And I know you mentioned that you haven't lived in Afghanistan before, but from what you know about your culture, or if someone is visiting Tajikistan,
Mhm.
what is something different from Toronto culture?
Well, if someone were to go to Afghanistan, it's a really great country. Like the people are very hospitable. Even like the poorest person you find, they will still have like something to give you as a guest. Like you're visiting their home, their country. So they're very, very kind people. And I know like the media and like people in general have bad ideas of Afghanistan and Afghans in general, but they're honestly really, really great people. They'll help you out like in any way they can, despite their own circumstances. I guess an advice I would give is just to have like an open mind when you're going. If you were to travel to Afghanistan, it's not like such a scary country full of scary people. They're normal. They have hobbies. They have interests. They have aspirations, and they have systems there like similar to Toronto, Canada. Like there are some differences. Now like the regime is a little frightening and they do certain questionable things, but the people are really great people, very kind and compassionate.
They're humans.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, I think the media has done a terrible job of representing Afghans and Afghanistan in general. I
Mm.
mean, even in school, I remember that we read The Kite Runner.
Mm.
And I mean, it was very, very well written. But when I would look up stuff online about it, I would find this very small community of Afghans who were so anti that book. And they were like, it perpetuates harmful stereotypes of what our country is like, what our government is like. So I was just curious, like, do you feel like not even just the Kite Runner specifically, but in general, media has made Afghanistan sound worse than it is, especially in school?
Yeah, for sure. I was talking to somebody a little while ago who was asking me about like Afghanistan. I told her that yeah, women work there, women have jobs and can go out and do this and this and that. At least like in the past, they could. She was so shocked. She's like, everything I've learned like through the media of Afghanistan is just like a war zone. Women have no rights at all. I guess like dehumanization of Afghans and the country and the people. And I'm not saying like it's a perfect country. Like it does have flaws, but every country is like that. But I definitely think that like in the media, they portray Afghans in like a very aggressive and violent and backwards people, when that's not true. Like the Afghan people in general, they're not the regime. They're their own people. They are just like forced into certain circumstances. They have dreams like somebody in Canada would, to get an education, have a good future, things like that. So yeah, I think the media just makes it out to be like, oh, Afghans are so far away from like how we are as a people. But when you go back to the basics, like we're all human beings. We all have goals and dreams and aspirations. And an Afghan person is like no different than a Canadian. I don't think they should be judged for their religion or the color of their skin or the area of the world they're from.
I agree with you. And I think that that's also one of the main focuses of this podcast, to combat these stereotypes so common that it's almost like people's belief now. It's not even a stereotype anymore. So definitely we need to speak up about that and change that. Is there any area in the media where this change could start as someone who is from Afghanistan?
I think like just giving voices to Afghan, whether it's youth, women, men from all ages. I think the way that like the media always depicts Afghanistan, or like if you search Afghanistan on Google, you'll find like rubble, and when you think of Afghanistan, you think of like war, things like that. But it's a very beautiful scenic country. They have lots of mountains and greenery and lakes and all these great things. So I think not just reducing the country to it being a war-torn country full of poverty-stricken people, and showing that there's more to Afghanistan than what has been shown for like the past 20 years of war and violence.
I'm going to be honest, even when I imagine Afghanistan, the first picture that kind of pops in my head is what you were describing, of like
Yeah.
rubble and brown and
Exactly, yeah. Yeah, and I think like that's like not just Afghanistan, countries like Iraq or like other Middle Eastern countries. People just tend to think that it's just war torn, it's just like desert, and people don't acknowledge that there are human beings that live there. It's not all just violence. There's lots of great things in those countries too.
we're approaching the last part of the podcast, which is where we learn a little bit more about Afghan culture. So I was wondering if you could share what kind of cultural clothing comes from your country.
There's different cultural clothing depending on your background and like what area you are of the country. But I think the most popular, it's called Gandhi Afghani, which is just what a woman wear. It's usually very heavy dresses with like really intricate designs and embroidery, and then you match that with jewelry, headpieces, big earrings, big necklaces, things like that.
And what about for men?
It's a little more simple. They'd wear these vests, have different designs, usually for like Eid or special occasions.
I only know Peran Tumban.
Yeah, Parantamban. Yeah, that's what the men wear.
So that's for men only.
Yeah, it's really simple, and like they add like a vest or something to kind of like bedazzle it a little bit.
Okay. What about some dishes from your country? Because I know Toronto is full of Afghan restaurants, and honestly, I think it's my favorite cuisine in the whole world.
Honestly, it's my favorite food too, and like not just because I'm Afghan, it's just so like simple, but the flavor is just so impeccable. The most popular is called Qabli Palau, which is just like rice with carrots, meat. Sometimes people put raisins on top. That's really popular. And then there's like different kind of kebabs. There's mantu, which is kind of like a dumpling dish, which is really, really popular. My favorite Afghan food is boinjan biryani, which is like this eggplant stew, and then you put yogurt on top of it, and it's just so good. It's so yummy. I love Afghan food.
It's amazing, and that sounds delicious. Is there any spot in Toronto that you feel like serves authentic Afghan food?
I haven't been to like an Afghan restaurant in so long, just because like we make the food at home every day. I think the most recent one I went to is called Nana Kebab. Their food is pretty good. Bomyan Kebab, I used to go to a lot. But I think like the Thorncliffe area has a lot of different Afghan food restaurant places.
I've actually only been to Naan Kebab and Bamiyan Kebab, and I love them both.
Yeah.
I guess for our listeners, if you want to try some authentic Afghan food, you can check out those places. What is the Afghanistan entertainment industry like? What kind of movies or shows or music are produced there that people can connect to while living in Toronto?
It's an interesting question just because like with the new regime, they don't really allow certain things like plays and music and theaters, things like that. So it's a little hard to actually find those sources of entertainment right now. But before like 3 or 4 years ago, cinema in Afghanistan is not really too big. I think like maybe in like the 90s or early 2000s it was like kind of there. But now like the cinema, unfortunately, there's not a lot going on there. And honestly, I don't like some of the Afghan cinema. Like I'm not a big fan, so I kind of like steer away from it myself.
Do you know what the 90s and 2000s films used to be about?
No, honestly, I remember like watching some like when I was little, and there's this one specific movie that I watched that was just so traumatizing for me as a child that I was like, you know what,
Oh,
I'm done with Afghan films. Like I did not want to watch it because it was just like very like an action movie, I guess. Afghans love action movies. Like not for me, you know?
yeah. Okay, so entertainment is kind of on hold right now.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. What about from a few years ago before the current regime was in power?
Music was really big. Like there was different shows for like music and entertainment. They were really popular, like similar to the shows like The X Factor.
What are the types of songs that come from Afghanistan? Like maybe what genre or what is like a classic Afghan sound from your country?
I think like pop honestly is like really, really popular. And the past few years also rap kind of emerged. And it's like rapping kind of like some rappers were saying about like their socioeconomic status in Afghanistan, things like that. There's folk. Yeah, like a lot of folk music too. That's really popular. But I think pop is probably the most prominent genre.
Okay. Well, Michelle, thank you so much for coming on the show today and representing Afghan Canadian culture. I cannot wait to go to Naan Kebab and Bamiyan Kebab and eat some more Afghan food and remember this conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much. Before we end this interview, I was just wondering, how do you say bye?
We say Khuda Hafiz, just means like God watch over you.
Khuda Hafiz.
Yeah.
Beautiful. I love it.
Khuda Hafiz.
Khuda Hafiz. Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of Hand the Mic Over. Be sure to check us out on Spotify, YouTube, and at our Instagram, Hand the Mic Over. Follow us for more updates on when our next episode will be released and to see some pictures and some media posted on our Instagram. Until next time.